Norm Macdonald is a great comedian pretending to be a bad comedian. If you want to understand what makes him a comics comic in the most simple terms possible, he's just doing humor that is satirizing bad humor. And obviously other comics are gonna find that very funny.
Bob, you have a lot of well-wishers here tonight, and a lot of them would like to throw you down one. A well. They want to murder you in a well. Seems a little harsh, but...
I think there's a lot more layers to what's happening here, though. I actually think that being a stand-up comic and some of the experiences you go through actively warp your taste in humor. So using Norm as a template, I want to define his sense of humor, what makes it unique, and then also what makes artists' taste unique. What is that personality trait that makes them like these avant-garde comics? The first thing I want to do here is just dive into my favorite Norm joke of all time, which is his joke about World War II.
In the early part of the previous century, Germany decided to go to war. And who did they go to war with? The world. So you figure that would take about 5 seconds for the world to win, but no, it was actually close.
This joke falls into a genre of humor which I don't think officially has ever been defined, but I'm gonna come up with a name for it. I'm gonna call it abstract familiarity. What that is to me is jokes where a comedian takes something you are super familiar with and then abstracts it until it feels new, weird, or almost alien. I think one of the coolest and most clear examples of this sort of humor is the Strange Planet comics. They're a series of webcomics that you probably have seen around on the internet or maybe even on bookshelves now. I know they've published them. I think they're the most succinct way of representing this style of humor because it's literally using aliens to show you how weird your everyday life is. I think a lot of what Norm Macdonald does is the same as what these comics do. He's taking World War II and he's abstracting it until it feels crazy. Norm is successfully opening your eyes to something you already knew. And he's doing that by talking about it kind of as if he's an idiot. He's delivering this joke with the cadence of a comic who is giving you huge revelations, but he's saying stuff you kind of already know. And that weird way in which his punchlines are actually super predictable is kind of what I'm talking about where he pretends to be a bad comic.
Here's the deal, you don't get to be a country no more on account of you keep attacking the world.
A good joke is supposed to have a surprising ending. And the way Norm takes a long pause and then says something that you already know and is not surprising at all is sort of a terrible way of structuring a joke. But if you are someone who is overly familiar with the structures of stand-up comedy, this terrible joke is actually surprising because you were expecting a good joke. Weirdly enough, one of the best ways you can surprise a smart audience member is by being underwhelming. Norm is essentially implying he's about to say something smart using his cadence and structure, and then saying something really dumb and obvious. But once again, it's not actually dumb and obvious. It's kind of also profound in a weird way.
There's a shoebox with a turtle in it.
From where? What is that doing there?
What?
In my video on Louis C.K., I talked a lot about how his special, Hilarious, is mostly driven by his experience as being a recently divorced father. That's very central to almost everything he talks about in that special, and he uses it to jump to lots of different topics. I think that Norm, his central topic that he's most interested in is comedy itself. And that's why I think there's a quality of absurdism to his humor. The topic he is talking about is also the art form he's currently performing. It's a weird circle of reflexive art. In order to enjoy that, you as an audience member need to have two things, which is you need to have an innate sense of good and bad comedy, and you need to be very aware of the performative nature of comedy. And there are audience members who have that. Norm was my favorite comedian before I ever tried stand-up comedy. I think what makes it harder to prove and notice this is what Norm is doing is that he doesn't directly talk about comedy. He embodies a character. That character is a commentary on comedy, which is why I think I didn't really love Norm until I saw him on late night talk shows.
Letterman understands. He's smarter than both of them. He understands play the dumb guy, you know?
Late night talk shows are such a good format for Norm and for any form of satire because they're rigid. They're just the late night talk shows are the ultimate form of phoniness. I hate to make fun of something that some other people probably like, but I hate the current era of late night talk shows. There's a better era of it in the past, but currently it's just so rehearsed and inauthentic. And I think if you're a comedian like Norm, who's kind of making fun of inauthenticity and normal structures of comedy, that's a great environment for you. On top of that, the host of the show is a great counterbalance to Norm that he can play off of. I think Norm's sense of humor is highlighted by having a little bit of shadow. The late night talk host plays the classic straight man role that almost every sitcom has, which is a main character who is much more serious than the humorous characters around them. I think one of Norm's best comedic partners ever was Conan O'Brien, because Conan clearly loved Norm's sense of humor and knew how to be the perfect opposite to it. There's two bits that Norm did on Conan that I will always cherish. The first of which is this mosquito story.
The driver we sent to pick you up told you a joke.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell it now on the show.
Yeah, that's how I get a lot of my material.
Okay.
A moth goes into a podiatrist's office, and the podiatrist's office says, "What's the problem?" Honestly, Doc, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I don't even know if Gregory Olinovich knows. He only knows that he has power over me. A cocked and loaded gun that lays on the bedside behind me. And in this hellish facade once
How
and
long
for
a
all.
drive was this? Please, sorry.
He says, "Doc." The doctor says, "Moth, man, you're trouble. But you should be seeing a psychiatrist. Why on earth did you come here?" And then the moth said, "Because the light was on."
A classic, what we call a shaggy dog story, which is a story that the humor of it is that it doesn't really have a point. I think what Norm is really doing is he's satirizing the way late night shows have a certain sense of self-importance. Back in the day, everyone had to wear a suit and tie when they would come on the show. There's a whole band. It's like weirdly formal and fake. And so Norm is making fun of your expectations for that situation. And that doesn't mean he hates it. Like, I don't think that Norm satirizing this situation means that he hates late night shows. I kind of do, but I think he was a big fan of them. He was a huge fan of David Letterman. I think you can make fun of something you love and still love it, even if you have critiques of it. Point is that the idea of telling a shaggy dog story on something as hypothetically important as a late night talk show is a really clever way of making fun of the format. And that's the first thing he brings to late night. The other thing he does that's really clever is he makes fun of the fact that you're supposed to be promoting something when you come on a late night show, right? Like almost always, actually, I think literally always, when you come on a late night show, you do it to show off like a book you're selling or a movie you're in or something like that. That's why celebrities go on those shows.
But what's the movie going to be called? Really?
I know what it's going to be called.
Yeah, what's that?
If it's got Carrot Top in it, you know what a good name for it would be?
What's that, Norm?
Box Office Poison.
She's in it. All right, well, there's this 2-hour season finale of Melrose Place. There's this movie coming out.
Yes.
Title undetermined at this point.
Chairman of the board.
Oh, all right. Do something with that, you freak.
I bet the board is spelled B-O-R-E-D.
Conan is masterful here in how he sets Norm up and plays a foil to Norm. You can see that Conan actually enjoys it, even though he's fighting against it. I think Conan has always been my favorite late night host. He understood the phoniness of late night and a lot of times broke through it himself. If there was ever a show that was just like Conan and Norm playing off of each other, I would have endlessly watched that. I think they have such a great dynamic. So that's generally speaking why Norm is so perfect for late night. But I think there's another layer to all this, and I think it's important to dive into who are stand-up comedians in order to answer the question, why do comics like this stuff?
I just don't know how 6 million people disappear from the face of the earth.
Being an amateur stand-up comedian is brutal. New York City open mics are only comics watching other comics. The only people in the audience are other people who will be on the mic. And most New York comics do like 3 or 4 open mics a night where they do the same material over and over again. And they hate every second of it. And everyone doesn't want to be there. They're miserable. It's work. And that experience, which almost every comic on earth goes through, warps your sense of humor. When you have watched as much comedy as I have, you've seen everything. Hundreds of hours of comedy, like more comedy than anyone should ever have to watch in their life. And so the only thing that can snap you out of it is shock humor a lot of the time. There are dark types of humor that will never make it to the mainstream, and they do really, really well at New York open mics. Using my own humor as an example, I have a story that I sometimes tell for real audiences at real shows about my grandfather's passing, and it's a fairly earnest story. When I do it at open mics, I add in a line about necrophilia that's not in the real joke I do for audiences, and that necrophilia line kills with other comics, and I have tried it once, and it freaks real people out. And I'm sure there's some people who are like listening right now who are like, no, I would like the necrophilia joke. Maybe you would. I'm sure there's some people who would like it. But when you're an up-and-coming comic, you have to perform to every type of audience. It's really hard to be a comics comic. You perform on showcase shows where there's 6 comics in a night, and audiences don't know who they're going to see that night. I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that a comic who's super famous gets to perform to their fans. If you want to be a professional comedian, you have to be funny to people who are not your audience. You have to be able to go up on stage every night of the week and perform to whoever shows up at that club. And it's so hard. People have very different tastes in humor. There are Seinfeld fans out there, and there are Anthony Jeselnik fans out there. And those are 2 random examples, but picture them in your mind. Those people do not have the same sense of humor, and they might be at the same comedy show on the same night, and you kind of have to make both of them laugh. The job of being a stand-up comedian can absolutely be brutal. You can be on the road and have no time to even record a video. I'm recording here in my hotel room by myself without my family or my friends. You know, there are times where it sucks, and there are times where you spend hundreds of hours watching terrible comedy and your taste gets warped and you get bitter. But Norm comes in and reminds you, hey, didn't you start this whole thing at one point with an earnest love for humor? My favorite thing about Norm is I love how it feels like he's got an inside joke about everything and he's performing for himself. Norm Macdonald is almost like a pressure relief for me. I put pressure on myself to have good jokes. So when I see Norm go up there and have bad jokes, I'm like, oh, none of this matters. Why am I taking comedy so seriously? His humor is essentially saying, hey man, why are you trying to be perfect when being terrible can also actually be funny? I am definitely guilty of taking comedy too seriously. I think this YouTube channel is a perfect example of that. I think that's the really wonderful message I take away from Norm. No matter what you do in life, even if you are professionally funny, it's so easy to forget that you're supposed to be having fun. And I think we all lose track of that sometimes.
There's 2 kinds of guys. There's guys like Pryor who are like brilliant because they're so vulnerable and you know who they are. And then there's guys like Bob Hope are brilliant because they're like invisible. To me, Bob Hope in a way is a little bit on a higher level because he presents a sort of existential view of life where everything is reduced to the breeziest jokes. It doesn't even seem like he's a person. It seems like he's a cartoon. It's like if you about grapes of wrath, you're like, hey, there's no grapes.
Yeah.
Or you put in the grape section. That's smart.
Yeah.
Then everybody will find grapes of wrath.
Yeah.
People that like grapes.
Okay, listen, Norm.